Okay. Okay, let's start. Hello everyone. Today is August 24th, and this is Velero community meeting. First, let's check the status. So we have released version 1.1, and we have fixed the 11 issues. And for version 1.10, copy integration is also on track, and we have made a target, actually the nearest target, that is to make through the two passes from end to end. And after that, we will be able to do some start to do some, the compatibility testings and also performance testings and tunings. And we have to add some new completions for computer refactories. We have finished the VSL controller refactory, backup sync controller refactory, and GC controller refactory. Some new will be coming later. Yeah, that's it. So for personal update, myself is still working on copy integration items, and besides that, I've also worked on some PR reviews. That's from my side. And Xun.
Backup sync controller refactor with co-builder is done. And this week, we were working on the community issue support and investigate several resource filtering function related issues. And that's all.
Okay, thanks. And Daniel, please.
This week I reviewed some PRs and add a parameter for the Velero server to control the uploader type. So, and that's the switch to control. We'll be using CoPR or REST for the pod volume backup and restore. Later, we'll be integrated with other controllers to establish the end-to-end workflow. So that's all for me for this week.
Okay, thanks. And Qi.
Over the last week, I was working on refactoring GC controller with QBuilder, and the code has been merged. Yeah, that's all for now.
Okay, thanks. And Danfeng.
First I add a new end-to-end test script, which is backup CRD, which use different API extension, API versions, and fix a issue of exclude label end-to-end test, and add a clean step after each test to release the BSL space. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you. And Ming.
I'm working on uploader integration. That one PR that related with CoPR implementation has been merged, and I'm working on the REST. Now that is all for me.
Okay, thanks. And Wenkai.
Yeah, I'm working on the CoPR integration items and also review some PR for this part. Yeah, just that's it for me.
Okay, thanks. Scott, please.
Yeah, so I have a couple of PRs open. Previous ones were one around the item action progress monitoring. There's been review. I know we were hoping to get some comments from Dave, and looks like he's not available on that. So I think we may have to go forward without him on that. I don't know if anyone's reached out. I know Orlin had mentioned before he went on vacation, he was going to reach out to Dave to see if he was available to, provide feedback on that. But it looks like we may have to go forward without that. And actually, sorry, on the first one I mentioned, I got to fix it in the status. I had the wrong description. It's not the existing resource one. That's actually a PR that Shubham had put together, but it's another bug around an empty namespace list. Basically, if there's a situation where when Velero processes the includes and excludes on the namespace list, if the result is an empty list right now, that causes a panic and crashes the Velero server. And so it's just a bug fix PR that I have out to handle that logic for the it's kind of an edge case. But if there's a situation where the includes and excludes get evaluated together and there's nothing left, then instead of crashing, it'll actually work. And the expected thing is basically only namespace. Sorry, only you might get cluster scope resources, but nothing from namespaces. But what you won't have is crashing the Velero server. So that's a bug fix PR that I pushed, I created a couple days ago. And then we have.
Sorry to interrupt,
Yep.
Scott. So I'm still a little confused after your comment. Maybe we can discuss offline, or you want to discuss with me?
Are you talking about the empty namespace list, or are you talking about the one that Shubham's PR?
The empty list PR.
Okay, yeah, we can talk.
Okay,
so I can just kind of describe. Basically, what's going on there is that in the case where Velero is backing up every namespace, the way at this point, the namespace list will have a single entry, and that's going to be an empty string. So the slice will have a length of 1, and the only item in that list is going to be an empty string. So that's the case where we're backing everything up. In which case we skip this section. The other case that was already handled appropriately was if you have a list of namespaces that's not complete, you might have namespace 1 and namespace 2 or whatever. In that case, then the if condition would succeed, and you would go into this block because you're saying that list is not, it doesn't begin with an empty string. The case that was not handled, this is fixing, is the case where the list is actually an empty list, which means the slice has a length of 0. There's nothing in it, and that's also so the issue there is now we're saying, hey, there are no namespaces we're backing up, so we don't want to skip this block, because skipping this block is what you do if you're backing up the whole cluster. We want to go into this block because because it's less than a full cluster backup, because this block will exit before we go on to handle some logic below, which is only done for full cluster backups. So in the if condition in this PR, basically we enter the block if it's either if there's either entries in that list that are not an empty string, which means I have namespace 1, namespace 2, namespace 3, and that's it. But we also want to go into the block in the same way if it's an empty list. If there's nothing, if the slice has a length of 0. Where we want to skip is if the slice exists, there's an entry in it, and that entry is an empty string, because that is the way Velero says, hey, we're backing up the whole cluster with all the namespaces. So with the suggested that you had there, that would not do the right thing in the case where it evaluates to no namespaces in the backup.
But if you check the code, I mean, in this class, it try to iterate the list. So if it's an empty,
oh well, right. So so it won't go through any of those, which means it won't add any of that, and so it'll end up. But the other thing is what happens is after we iterate over that list, in which case if there's nothing in the list, then we don't enter that loop. There's a return statement, and so we want to return and not go on, because the going on is that logic is we're only supposed to be going on if we're backing up every namespace.
I see, you're right. So so would it make sense if you also update the comment in the line 228, because that is a little, I think, misleading, because that says it only certain ones. So it seems to me, I'm not a native speaker, but it seems to me implies if that's an empty list, we should not enter this.
Okay, yeah, I can update it, and what I will probably change it to say is that if we're if basically if we're looking at the namespaces resource and it's not a full cluster backup, which means either there's a list of explicit namespaces or it's an empty list. I can link in the comment to make that clear here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so and then the third thing, after this PR, which I hadn't mentioned yet, and this is an additional. There's no additional progress this week. I'm just bringing it up again because the plugin. No, sorry. The basic credentials work. That already has one approval. It just needs one more approval, and we can merge it. I had responded to feedback. I made some changes. There was one approval. So I just need one more approval, and that should be good to go. And obviously, if there's any changes needed, we can, go into that as well. But
yeah, I added myself to the reviewer. I'll follow up.
okay, great. And the third thing was not really as much a status update, but more of a question. Fourth thing, I guess. Sorry. The plugin versioning work. I know Fang has been working on that. And it was mentioned last week that he had been, actually I guess the last couple of updates, he's been kind of pulled off into some other things. I just wanted to point out, and I'll reach out to him directly. If necessary, I may be able to kind of chip in and help out there, or maybe someone else on the OADP side at Red Hat could as well. I can work with people there, just because this is something we need for the data mover work that Shubham's talking about, because that builds on the item action progress, which builds upon the plugin versioning. So that's kind of a blocker for some things here. So if that's going to be at risk, then we may need to look at putting some additional resources onto that. And I may be able to help that directly, or if not myself, then someone else on the OADP side may be able to chip in there as well. But I'll reach out to Fang directly on that this week to see where he is with that. He may be up and running on it again, in which case it may not be a concern.
Okay.
That's it for me.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And Shubham?
Hey, hi. So I have a PR for the issue which I had brought up in earlier call. So basically this solves the edge cases where you don't get an already exists error, because let's say what we do is generally we perform a create call for the object that needs to be restored. And if we get an already exist error, KDS error, then we say that the object is already exist. But what if there is a case when the create call doesn't get executed? That was the bug that we found out, like due to admission webhook validation, we were unable to get the already exist error, but in reality, the object was existing in cluster. So what Velero did was it tried to restore. Basically, it was a false positive. So what we are doing is we just want to cover those edge cases by doing a get call and checking whether that is actually a already exist case or not.
And I just wanted to clarify one thing too on that, because this is something that I worked with Shubham on and working through the fix here, and it's not so much a case where we want to have a more specific error message. It's that we're failing a restore now, and we actually don't want to fail it, because when an object already exists, Velero will put a warning in there. I mean, this depends on that existing resource policy, but when you apply the none resource policy, which is the default, we don't fail restore if the resource exists already. We put in a warning if it's different from what's in the backup in the cluster, or no warning at all if the object hasn't changed. So we were getting, as Shubham said, in one case here where there was some additional validation happening in this webhook admission webhook, where it was failing with a different error message before the cluster controller even got to the point of trying to create call, which means the error type we got back was not the expected one for an already exists. And so Velero is marking this as an error and partially failing the restore, when in reality, and giving the user a very confusing error message talking about, you're only allowed to have one default volume snapshot class. But the user wasn't trying to create a second one. They were just trying to do a store, and that was in the backup. So what it should have done was recognize, hey, this thing already exists. We're going to apply the existing resource policy, which in the default case is just, okay, warn if it's different, or do nothing if it's the same, and move on. So this is allowing Velero to recognize that case so that we don't fail a restore when we shouldn't be failing it.
Yeah, I think the call code is here, right? So if
Right.
it's not existing error,
Right,
okay.
exactly. So basically, there's two situations that you know when we issue the create call. Actually, there's three things that can happen. Either it succeeds, in which case that's a normal case. We're not touching that here, or it fails with an already exist error. And in that case, we go down this path of the existing resource policy and comparing resources and all that. And then the third case here is it fails with another kind of error. And right before this PR, Velero always assumes if it's another kind of error, it's an error, we're going to fail this thing. And this gives us one more check to say, before we do that, let's just make sure this object doesn't already exist, because if it already exists, we're going to apply the resource policy. So we're not making an part of the reason the logic is done this way is we didn't want to force an extra get call for every object, because that would be a lot of processing. And we didn't want to force an extra get call when we had the already exist error, because we're already getting it there. So the only time we have an extra get call is if there's an error returned from create and it's not an already exist error. This gives us that additional information to say, oh, okay, this thing does already exist, but we got a different error this time. Or, oh, it doesn't already exist. So we take the original error and add that to the restore, just like we're doing now.
Yeah, actually, we have discussed this issue once more locally, and we're just thinking that whether we can seek for another approaches like because it's an error that returned by the Kubernetes API, right? Whether we can seek help from the Kubernetes, that is for the first approach.
Yeah.
The other approach, whether we can get some hint from the error messages.
Yeah,
so
that's not going to help here though, because in this specific case, the error is saying, hey, you can't have two different default volume snapshot classes. So if the user was trying to restore one with a different name that wasn't a duplicate, so it wasn't already existed, you would get that exact same error back. So there's two situations where the cluster will give you this exact same error type and error message. And that is, if you try to create a second volume snapshot class with a completely different name, but also say it's default, then that's an error that you get back that we need to propagate as an error in the restore, because in that case, Velero can't restore it because it's violating the rules for having two different volume snapshot classes, both labeled as default. But in the case of the duplicate one, where the name is the same, Velero is not trying to create a second default volume snapshot class. It's trying to restore one that's already existing. So you really can't base it on the error message, because that error is a valid error if it's not a duplicate resource, if it doesn't already exist. The only way we know we can distinguish between this error is for something that already exists versus this error is for something that doesn't already exist is to do a get call.
Well, can we double check the error in the issue? I thought there is some clear message.
Right, the error that we saw was the error that you get from a cluster if you try to create two different volume snapshot classes that are both labeled default.
Error message is pasted in the issue.
Is it in the issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, because if the one that existed in the cluster had a different name, you would have that same error from the cluster, and so Velero can't tell just from that error message that this is a default a duplicate resource that needs to be updated or patched. Because what would happen, especially if we were using the patch policy for already exist resources, is that if we incorrectly said, oh, we think this thing already exists, and then we make the get call and try to patch that, that'll fail because the resource doesn't exist.
I see your point. So, but the change in that PR essentially, results in the situation that we treat every arrow, we check again for every arrow to see if it's already
we do a get call to see if it exists. So after a failed create call, basically right now, and again, if we want to talk about two situations, so before this code, before this PR, anytime the create fails, if it's an already exists error, we then do a get call to compare the resources. But if it was a different kind of error, then we didn't do a get call. So with this change, anytime there's an error, there will be one get call for that resource just to either to see if it does exist, or if we know it already exists, to get the information so that we can compare it to the current resource. So, so if you had a restore with, 1,000 resources that you're restoring, and there were 5 errors, and 4 of them were not already exist errors, then in that case, you're adding 4 more get calls. I mean, the only time this would be a significant performance issue would be if everything you're trying to restore is failing. And in that case, performance is not really your biggest problem, because we're only adding a get call if a create fails.
Yeah, personally, I think, yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
No, please, you go ahead. I'm still thinking.
Okay. Personally, I think, yes, indeed, there is no performance issue or performance overhead, but the code is just somehow look a little bit weird, because it still look like a Kubernetes problem, because even in the situation that two objects are with different name, but are working for the same thing. For example, they are using the same label. Kubernetes should still return different error messages. If here the problem that the Kubernetes just return the same error messages. So
yeah, I mean, right.
It may or may not be a Kubernetes issue, because, for example, there may be 3 condition Kubernetes need to check. They may fail in other condition before Kubernetes check the existence.
Right. And it could be in webhook. That's why we just specifically didn't want to have to think about fixing this for the limited case of this particular Kubernetes issue, because anytime a create call fails with an error that's not the expected one, but it already exists, we want to kind of cover all those cases here, because, and you're right, this may be considered a Kubernetes bug. To me, this is not the right message to return. I think what I would want to see as a user of this Kubernetes API is I want to see the already exist error. But I know I've seen this exact situation working on a different project a couple of years ago, where again, this was outside of Velero, where we were trying to use an already exist error, and it was failing on us for one particular use case for one particular resource type. And we had to apply a similar approach, because the reality is that a product like Velero sometimes has to work around Kubernetes behaviors that we might want to call bugs, but we don't have control over. And so we still need to do the right thing, even if Kubernetes is not giving us the most appropriate error message. And so this is kind of adding resilience to Velero, so that Velero won't fail a restore when nothing wrong happened, everything worked as expected, but because of what might be a Kubernetes bug, again, whether or not the developers of that particular mission webhook would agree with us it's a bug or not, the reality is Velero still needs to be able to restore this thing, because this is not really an edge case. This is something that we hit the point where basically with Kubernetes, I think it's 124, we see this pretty much in every case with the CSI plugin, because we add the volume snapshot class to the backup to make sure it's restored in case you're restoring to a different cluster. But every time we restore it, and this is a Kubernetes change with the new, because in previous Kubernetes versions, they didn't enforce that rule about the volume snapshot class default. I think that the function, the behavior, if you had 2 defaults, was kind of indeterminate, but it wasn't a hard error to create it. And so they added that in 1.24. And basically without this fix, CSI plugin as written is going to basically fail restores all the time.
I understand your
So
point, Scott, and
so it's all about the status of the restore, right? Because it didn't really impact the workflow
Right,
anyway.
right, exactly.
I mean,
I mean, everything got restored. It's just that the restore shows up as partially failed because, you know, when the restore hits an error, you know, on the create, if it's not an already exist error, we log that as an error on the restore. We move on to the next object. So, you know, the restore was completely successful from the point of view of what got restored to the cluster. However, it's reported to the user that it was a partial failure, and the user sees, oh, the volume snapshot class restore failed, which is going to make the user think that anything related that depended on that failed. So they're going to think maybe their volumes are corrupted or that they didn't get restored properly, because if the volume snapshot class couldn't restore, then CSIs might not be working. So this is a user confidence issue as well.
yeah, I understand your point, but I think this reflects a difference in the concept. Think of the case you write a file to a storage. If there's an IO error, you fail to write.
Right.
But in that storage, there is an identifier already. So do we consider that a successful case or failure case?
Yeah. Well, but for you know, if you're saving a file, you know, and in the file case, that's explicitly considered a failure because you want to know, hey, I didn't save this thing. But it's just the way Velero handles already existing resources. You know, the API and these kind of design of Velero has decided that if I try to restore something that already exists, that's not an error. You know, it's a warning, and that's the way Velero works for everything else when we get that already exist error. And because some controller is giving us an unexpected condition, but we have the ability to determine that it does already exist. This lets us, you know, basically preserve existing Velero documented behavior, you know, in all cases, rather than having to document, oh, sometimes errors are not really errors, and here's why, and here's how. I mean, because we really can't predict that. There's no situation where, you know, anytime there's a real error that should have been, you know, flagged as an error, the object won't exist. So we'll preserve that error, and that will be passed on to the user just like it is now. The only thing this is going to change is in cases where we know for a fact that Velero shouldn't be failing, and probably the controller in Kubernetes should have given us something different, but it didn't, and we can't control that. So this is kind of Velero's, you know, trying to be resilient in the face of the fact that, you know, Kubernetes is doing something less than ideal, and we have to work around that. Just like, you know, there have been other cases in Velero code where, you know, we've had to do things like, you know, wait for something to complete or wait for something to exist, even though Kubernetes should, you know, cooperate with things that don't exist yet. But, you know, not every controller follows the pattern, and we have to deal with the real world where users have real workloads that they have to be able to back up. And we can't tell users, hey, sorry, you can't back up your application because there's a, you know, an obscure Kubernetes bug in the, you know, in the volume snapshot class. Especially if we have I mean, obviously, if there's a Kubernetes bug that we can't work around that makes Velero fail, that we can't deal with that. We have to get that fixed. But if there's something like this where we can, you know, put some, and maybe we need some clear documents in the code to make it clear what's going on here. But this lets us move forward, not tell the user that the restore failed, especially since, again, this is going to happen for pretty much any restore with Kubernetes 1.24 or newer with the CSI plugin. And that's the other thing. It's not really an edge case anymore, because it seems that it's always happening, and at least with OpenShift clusters. And Shubham, do you know whether pure Kubernetes clusters are going to have this too? I suspect this is a Kubernetes level.
Yeah, because this error is coming from Kubernetes CSI. So
yeah, so anybody on on the latest 124 or CSI code is going to hit this problem.
Yep.
Okay.
If they're using the CSI plugin.
Yes. So I think your argument sounds reasonable, but I think I need some time to really get convinced. We may take this offline and we do some discussion, and maybe we need to tweak the code to make it less, because currently the code looks a bit confusing, to be honest. What is doing there? Like it's checking an error again and again. So but I agree that if we decide for a particular resource, if it's already in the target cluster and Velero is designed to skip restoring that, and if it sees any error, we probably should not fail the restore. That makes sense.
Right.
And
maybe that Shubham could add some additional comments here to make it clear what we're doing and why we're doing it, and kind of the use case. Maybe that'll make it clear. I don't know. Yeah.
So let's take this offline and we continue discussing on this one. But I think you make yourself pretty clear, and it also sounds reasonable to me. Yeah. Okay.
I think the object exist checking code maybe can be moved into the already exist checking function, and that will make the code more concise. Simple.
We could do that. In fact, I know.
Well, that's an additional API call. Right?
Yeah. The only thing about that is we'd have to return, because if we embedded that in the already exists, what we don't want to do is to make two different get calls. That was the first approach, because if we get to make sure it already exists, and then we return saying, hey, true, then we still need to get it again later, because we need that reference to check the compare. So if the actually this Tiger, if you're on the call, that almost sounds like you're, because you had an alternate approach that you were proposing internally. I think that may have been the way you did it. Was that correct?
Maybe basically all the get calls are moved. I'm reusing the get call inside the is already exists function.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like because it was just proposed that maybe we should do that. So if it makes sense, I'm just saying that because I think your approach was basically to, in the is already exists function itself, rather than just check the error type, do a get if it's the wrong kind of error, and then return true. So yeah, but like you said, then that needs to return the result of the get call as well. That way we don't have to call it again, because we don't want to obviously make the call twice. But that's another approach that we actually had a discussion internally, Red Hat, about which approach makes more sense too, for similar reasons as to what's going to be clear as to what's going on. So I don't know if that's an approach that others want to see. Maybe we should submit, Tiger could submit his alternate approach that, as far as from what I remember, was functionally equivalent to this, but that did kind of hide that logic in the already exists function, rather than and the other thing about we would need to make sure that this version that we clarify, because the first version of this PR that we had of Shubham's PR, we had a bug in it that actually broke some other stuff that we fixed. So we need to make sure this one also made the same fix. But
yeah, I think we can double check offline. And
yeah, I don't wait, which one is it? Is this the one, or is that the?
It's from.
Which PR is this one here? Was this the one that Shubham made originally, or was this Tiger's PR?
It's Tiger's PR.
Okay.
Yeah, because current situation is that when we started working on Velero, we found that there are quite a few really strange condition checking that makes us confused. Given so we do not know the history, so we don't want to add to that. So yeah.
Right. So it may be that putting this in the already exists error will make it clear to others involved, and that's fine. I'm not really so concerned about, this approach versus that. I just need the bug fixed because,
Yeah,
it's kind of a
understood.
problem. But if
Sure.
Tiger's approach is clear to people and, that's, we can submit that as an alternate approach. And if that's the one that people want, then, as long as we test it to make sure that, obviously it's equivalent
Totally,
in
totally
the edge
understood.
cases.
Yeah, maybe we just check, update the comment and reference the specific issue or somehow to make the future maintainer understand the reason here. That
That
may
is a
be
good point.
enough.
Like you said, there's a
Yeah.
lot of things where, I look in the code and say, what's this for?
Yeah, right.
And everybody that was
Definitely.
working on Velero at the time that code was written is not on the project anymore, so I can't ask anybody.
Right.
So yeah,
we want to
definitely need to
avoid
make sure
that
that's clear.
situation. Yeah.
And whether that means just adding comments here or that means embedding that check in the our existing, either one's fine by me. But yeah, we should be clear about it.
Yeah, agreed. So we follow up this PR later and make decision very soon. Okay.
Okay. Anything else, Chubang?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let's go to the discussions. So Daniel, this is for the plan, right? Please?
Yeah, so could you open that link? Guys, because we are approaching the milestone called feature freeze, at which point we wanna make sure that there is a concrete bucket of workload for 110, and so we can you first open that query? Yeah, so we want to remove all the 110 candidates, so it's either be in the 110 plan or it's removed from the 110 plan. We go through them internally and mark the few candidates we think should be deferred. Scott and Shubham, could you quickly look through that and you okay to defer those one to move it out of 110? Or do you need more time to discuss?
So I think the biggest one on our end here, I'm seeing here that is the data mover part, which that's what Shubham's been working on.
Yeah, but that I think per our earlier discussion, we're gonna provide the design, but this one is for the implementation, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So if that makes sense, I think we can add an issue and make sure it's in 110 is about the design. And for this one, we're gonna remove the candidate label.
But we are going to pursue plugin versioning for Velero 110, right?
Yeah, that's another issue. We found that we do, and we found that a few issues we think we are going to implement in 110 do not have an issue in the milestone. That may cause some problem when we, check the status of the FC. So if you have like anything, could you open the 110 milestone?
Yeah.
No, I mean the issue list, or
Okay.
would it be easier if I share my screen?
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, that'll be easy. So we're gonna make sure all these 110 issue are in this milestone. There's a 110. That's what I'm trying to do here. At the earlier of the planning, we also have this give me 1 second. A 110 candidate because we are not sure if we are going to do them in 110. We went through them internally to defer a few of them, and there are a couple of them we think we still need to think if that's a 110 candidate or not. I think this one we probably put it into 110, right? Because you already have a PR and almost approved.
Yeah,
draft.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that one already has one approval. We're just waiting a second approval.
So for this one, I'm gonna remove this label and add it to 110. So as Shubham pointed out, there may be other issues that we think we're gonna do in 110, but do not have the one-time milestone. I would suggest Scott and Shubham, you go through this list and make sure those ones you think are important for 110 are in this list. If they're not, you write up an issue and make sure things are consistent.
Okay, and
Yeah.
should we write up an issue for design of data mover, different issue for that?
I think there is already one of them.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh, here, design doc for data.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, so that's what we are trying to do. Because by the time the FC, this will be the single source of truth to see if you are okay to FC or RC and GA the 110. Okay, so for the deferred candidate again, you don't have any issue with deferring this one, right? These ones. If you're okay, I'm gonna remove the labels later after the meeting.
Maybe we could ping you on Slack once tomorrow.
Yeah,
after discussing.
but we still have time because the next topic I'm talking about is the timeline. Because we have assigned other work and have some resource issue here. According to our internal checking, I feel that it would be better if we delay the date a little bit. The reason we want to delay earlier is we want to avoid the situation that when we are really close to the FD date, we delay it 1 week and it causes a lot of chaos. If we make the decision make the decision earlier, but if we are in a better shape by then, we can make the date earlier. So then we are less stressed and things can go a bit more smoothly. So I'm trying to propose for the feature freeze. So to give us more time to decide which are in the 110. For example, in the versioning, and you mentioned there should be some other V2 plugins implemented in 110. Make sure there are issues created, so
Right.
we're gonna close the time window by the date of September 7th. So probably the next Beijing community meeting, we make the final decision. And for the FC, we delayed for 2 weeks. It appeared to be 3 weeks because there is a public holiday in China. Everyone is out of office for more than a week in the early October. So we tentatively delayed to October 19 and the RC1 early November. So we still have a 110 released in the middle late November before December. That also give us some buffer just in case there are problems before you guys are starting the holiday. We can still have some time to fix problems and make sure that the 110 is out in this year. So do you have any concern regarding this updated timeline? So that sounds like a no. So I will update the milestone, and that's probably the final timeline for 110 so far. Okay. And I'm gonna continue, Yonghui. So there is one other topic is that there's a 5th Wednesday again next week, but according to our previous discussion, we want to make sure there is a community meeting in North America or Beijing time zone every week, right? So shall we make some adjustment to the invitation so that the next week we have the community meeting in North America, and the one after that, September 7, we're gonna have the community meeting in Beijing. Jiaolin, do you know who can make this update when Orlin is not available?
I think no other can change this. Only Olin. Let me ping Olin to see if he can do some change during this.
But if he's not available, I think either one. Yeah, you can check. Please go ahead and check with Orlin, and either one of us can send this invitation, right? Just I think the right recipient, we just make sure this one is in this.
I mean, basically, you're not going to be modifying these existing ones because those are still first, second, third, fourth.
Right.
Basically, the idea is to add another one.
Right.
You know, for the 5th, and then I guess the question is you know, when it's going to be. But
yeah. So sorry. You say that again, Scott. You're not sure.
See, I'm just saying because the current invites are set, you know, one night right for the first of them, the first Wednesday, second, third, fourth. Those invites would all be unaffected because basically we're talking about adding a new invite on the 5th one, so that would be a brand new invite that would not be affected by the others.
Yeah. So so the first try, Jiaolin, please try to ping Orlin and let him fix it. If he's not responding.
The other thing we could do, I don't know. I mean, and this is maybe a question when Orlin comes back, because we've talked about changing the time on the North American meeting anyway. I don't know if it would be more confusing or less confusing to get away from the first, second, third, fourth, you know, Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesdays, and just say, you know, we're going to have the Beijing centric meeting, you know, every 2 weeks starting on this date at this time. And then the next week, we're going to do the North American meeting every 2 weeks starting this date, because you can, you know, schedule a meeting, you know, every 2 weeks instead of every week. Then it's not going to be consistent with first, second, third, fourth, you know, Wednesdays. But if you check calendars, you know, at least it's consistent. So it's every 2 weeks. So then the 5th week doesn't bother us anymore, because it's not, we don't care about, you know, how many Mondays or Wednesdays or whatever. So that may be another approach. Maybe we just do a one-off meeting for next week. Just decide, okay, it's going to be this time next week, this day, because it's happening at the end of August. And then when Orlin's back, we can finish that discussion and maybe bring up the question of, you know, what about the 5th week, or what about just making the meetings every 2 weeks, you know, on this at this time, you know, staggered. But I think those are discussions that we would need Orlin's input on as well, since he's a community manager. But for just next week, I think we can just make a decision. You know, we want to have a meeting next week. Let's pick a time and do it.
Okay. Yeah, that will also work. So the option A, we're gonna ping Orlin to make the update for this whole series.
I would say, yeah, let's wait on the series, because we already have another discussion that we postponed until he gets back, which was changing the time of the North America centric meetings anyway. So let's just bring the 5th week of the month into that discussion and kind of have one big, you know, kind of conversation about when we want meetings to happen. But in the short term, if we want to have a meeting next week, let's decide now when we're going to have it.
Yeah, I thought we already discussed this, that we want a meeting every week. So if we can find Orlin, we ask him to make the update to fix the 2 problems in one update. Okay, if we cannot find him, we just send a 10, you know, one-off invitation for 31st. Right. So on September 7th, there will still be the North America time zone.
Right.
If we cannot find Orlin, if we can find Orlin, September 7th will be Beijing time zone. That makes sense.
Well, I would say, just because I had a conversation with Orlin before he went on vacation about the meeting times, and he said that he wasn't going to make he wasn't going to make the decision about the changing times until he got back. And I know September 7th, he's already planning on not being back yet, because that's another meeting on the North America centric time that Shubham or I was going to be leading that meeting, because he wasn't going to be back yet. But it sounds like after that week he will be back.
Yeah, he's gonna be back actually after September 15th, according to his calendar.
Okay, got it. Right, it's right here. So I think right now, just because I think, since he's not available yet, let's just make the one-time call for next week, and then when he gets back, we can figure this out once and for all, and for all the meetings, because there's
if we cannot find him, but I think there is still a chance that Jiaolin can somehow find him, right?
Right. Well, it's a question of finding him and also being comfortable making decisions about long-term meeting plans, because it does change. Because if we switch to doing it every 2 weeks at this time and every 2 weeks at the other time, we're no longer on first, third, second, whatever Wednesdays, and that's fine. But that's also a change, not just to the calendar, but also to the invites and to the the website and all that, the community website. But if you talk to him and he's okay making that decision, then that's fine.
Okay.
I think what I'm understanding, the calendar problem for next week. We will not have any community meeting either in US time zone or in Beijing time zone, right?
Yeah,
next week.
So currently, yeah, I mean, because I know when we switched to this dual time format last year, when we just started doing the Beijing centric meetings, it was at that point decided to not have the meeting if there were 5 Wednesdays in the month, for whatever reason. And it sounds like we want to revisit that and come up with a simpler scheme now, which would make sense. But right now, because of that, there's no meeting scheduled on the on the list for next week.
Yeah.
So it sounds like everyone is even okay. There is no meeting Wednesday, right? Because that's already no plan. You think that? I thought that was a bug, but it turns out that was by design.
That's actually the way that was set up. And I think that's just because they wanted to make it clear that, okay, if it's the first Wednesday, then we're going to have it, the Beijing time. But I actually think the switching to just doing it every 2 weeks, starting this date, makes a little more sense anyway, because we've already have some confusion, because some weeks we have a meeting at this time on the first Wednesday and then the second Tuesday, but sometimes, or no, it's the first Tuesday and second Wednesday. But if the month starts on a Wednesday, that gets thrown off and the meetings are messed up anyway.
Right.
So that's caused confusion, once every 6 or 7 months. So I think if we just switch to a bi-weekly kind of situation where we say starting on this day, every 2 weeks, it's 8 a.m. Beijing time on Wednesday morning. And then the next week, starting that week, every 2 weeks, it's whatever time we decide the new North American meeting time is going to be, because we talked about making that earlier. I think so. Orlin has that existing discussion page about how changing meeting times. I think that might be a good time to make that kind of conclude this scheduling change as well. But in the meantime, since we already have a meeting scheduled for the the US centric meeting on the 6th of September, and then the Beijing one after that, I'm thinking right now, so we're not just making a decision, a long-term decision at the end of the call here. Let's just make a decision for next week. Let's have another Beijing centric meeting next week. And then the week after, it's the US centric meeting. So it'll be 2 in a row in this time zone, right now. But then hopefully when Orlin gets back, we can get that onto a kind of more regular basis.
Yeah, I think we can discuss change the whole series when Orlin back. Because at this time no one have permission to edit that series. So So I think maybe we can decide whether we need to have one community meeting next week for Beijing time zone or for US time zone. So that will fix the problem.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. The reason I want to make the change to the series is that we decided to update the feature freeze day, right? So I want to make sure that the Beijing guys are in this meeting in September 7th so that we can have this list. But I'll try to join the US meeting anyway. So to make sure that the feature freeze day, we have a concrete list. So it's less important whether we have a meeting in the next week, I think. Maybe we just keep it as is and skip it. And I will join this September 7th meeting anyway to make sure all these candidates and we have a finalized plan for 110. That sounds good to everyone, right? Okay.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So yeah, let's just
okay.
yeah. So let's just skip it, and I'll join the September 7th committee meeting anyway. Okay. Yeah.
By the way, Scott, when we have the US time zone community meeting, is there anyone can recording the session? I'm not sure whether other people can record the community meeting in US time zone when Olin is not.
So normally, when Orlin's not on vacation, he does that. The last couple of weeks, because he's been the last couple of meetings, we got things set up so that Shubham and I both would have permission to do it, but I don't know if it's because we're not VMware employees. It's been kind of flaky about that. So like last week, I wasn't able to log in and record, but Shubham was. So it hasn't been totally reliable for us with doing it.
Okay. So maybe, the reason I ask that is if there's no recording. Even Daniel.
There was a recording last week. It was a very short meeting because it was basically there was only I think 4 of us on the call. It didn't last very long last week, but I did record it. It's not. I don't think it's linked to anything because I'm not sure how to do that part. But the call was recorded.
Yeah, I did record the meeting, but I don't know who receives the recording. I didn't get any email.
Okay, got it. So, but Daniel, one suggestion from my side is, if we do this, feature free release the discussion on September 14, is that still okay for all of us? I mean, so that it.
Yeah, it's okay for me. So let me share my screen again. Sorry, guys.
I mean, I noticed the other dates you were pushing back a little more than a week. So if you push feature freeze to September 14th, that keeps that skew consistent down the line.
Okay. So it will be like this. So we're all good. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Yeah. Thanks for the suggestion. That's easier. We have more than necessary time to decide this one, but yeah, I think we're okay because we are continuing the development anyway.
Yeah. And the other point on the feature freeze there too, especially since we're talking about like one of the things that we've been trying to definitely get in is with the plugin versioning. If there's some handoff that needs to happen, to myself or someone on my side, that gives us enough time to actually get something in place there. Hopefully, to get that in place for there as well.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. And the next one is it's a demo. I think we can deliver to Shubham directly. Shubham, right?
So we are over time. Are you guys okay to shall I continue? Hello.
I think it's okay for me.
Okay. Let me share my screen. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes, yes, we
Yep.
can see it.
Okay, so basically this is a OADP CSI data mover demo. So we from Red Hat, we just wanted to show you guys what we want to, what we envision to do upstream in upstream Velero, and what we what we should anticipate as a data mover. Like data mover can have multiple implementations. So this is an example of CSI volume snapshot mover. So let's get started. So the agenda will be following, like we'll see the problem statement, there's some proposed solution, the CRDs that we want to introduce, the components involved, then backup workflow, then following restore workflow. Then we'll see a short demo of a stateful app. And then later on, we'll discuss the future scope related to Velero and how async plugin comes into picture and what we want to do with async plugin for data movement. And then references and Q&A. So problem statement, as everyone is aware that CSI snapshots like taken during the backup process are stored in storage provider cluster. So this means that the snapshot data is not actually safe from a disaster scenario since the snapshot exists on the cluster. So if the cluster is wiped out, your data is also gone. In short, CSI volume snapshots are not portable and durable. So proposal being, we want to extend the existing Velero CSI plugin to enable the data movement of data, that is CSI snapshots, to targeted object storage, that is the backup storage location. This will make the snapshots durable and portable, as the object storage location will generally be in a different data center than the snapshots which reside on the cluster. So we are introducing two new custom resource definitions, one for backup and one for restore. So the first one is volume snapshot backup, and the second one is volume snapshot restore. So this is just a snapshot of the spec and status that we are using currently, and we can go on similar lines for Velero's data mover as well. So basically the spec will have volume snapshot content, protected namespace details. So protected namespace is the namespace where Velero is installed or OADP is installed. And restrict secret reference is the secret reference which we want to use for data mover. So we basically will be using restrict to move snapshots to S3. Status is like has details pertaining to the PVC that we want to move, the restrict repository URL, the phase and status of data movement, and the volume snapshot class used. Similarly, for VSR, we'll have restrict secret reference. We'll have all the data of volume snapshot mover backup reference, then the protected namespace, and similarly, we'll have status conditions and the snapshot handle, which we want to refer during our restore. So these are the two CRDs. So some components that I want to give a brief overview that are involved in this data mover are like, basically there are three major components. That's a modified CSI plugin, then volume snapshot mover controller, and vol sync controller. So under modified CSI plugin for backup, we'll create a VSB CR per volume snapshot content and add it as an additional item if it's data mover case. So basically the CSI plugin will have a native workflow and a data mover workflow. And we'll also register a new backup item action plugin, which works on VSB that we added as an additional item, and add status data as annotation that we will be using for restore. So for modifications regarding CSI restore, we'll register a new restore item action plugin, which works on VSB encountered in backup, creates a VSR from VSB annotation data. Now we'll update the volume snapshot restore item action plugin to use the snap handle from data mover snapshot rather than the one present in backup, because data mover snapshot will be the one snapshot created by the data mover on the cluster. This will be new, and this is the one which consists of the data which we copy from S3 to the cluster during restore. So for the another component is volume snapshot mover controller. This will reconcile on VSB and VSR CRs that we introduced earlier, and it majorly performs the cloning process and deals with the data mover secrets. And we envision that this can be part of Velero controller itself. Now the third part is wall sync. So this is actually the data mover, that is a restrict data mover, which copies snapshot data from cluster to S3 and vice versa. This is vendor implementation. This is something which we want to keep pluggable. And for our use case for this demo, we'll be using wall sync's restrict data mover for data movement. So these are the components. So this is the backup workflow diagram. I'll just go through this diagram once before the demo so that it's not confusing. So basically, if you see here at the top, this is the application namespace, and this is the protected namespace. So protected namespace is the namespace where OADP is installed. OADP installs Velero, and it provides us with the Velero CSI backup plugin, that is the data move plugin. And here we have the application, which is stateful app consisting of a PVC. So for when you trigger a backup, the Velero CSI backup plugin will create a snapshot of this data source. Now, once the snapshot is created, for every volume snapshot content, as a volume snapshot backup CR will be created. Now, for this CR, we have a data mover, that is a volume snapshot mover controller, which reconciles on this and then creates a clone PVC. It also basically first of all, it creates a clone volume snapshot content. Then it creates a cloned volume snapshot and creates a clone PVC. So now this PVC is created in the namespace where Velero resides, and then Volsync transfers this PVC to remote storage. That is the S3.
So quick question. So you have to mount the PVC to a pod to do this.
Yes. Yeah. So for the PVC to act as a data source, we'll be mounting the PVC to a dummy pod, like which will be used as a data source. Yeah, you're right. Any other questions about backup workflow?
So by the clone under the hood, you're doing a CSI restore, right?
No. So this is just a backup workflow, right? By clone, we are just so every volume snapshot content will have a snap handle, right? So that snap handle can have multiple volume snapshot content referring to it. So just for the sake of data movement, for time being, we'll create a new volume snapshot content referring to that snap handle. Now this volume snapshot content with this VSC will create a volume snapshot, and this volume snapshot will have a PVC. Now that PVC will have the data of the volume snapshot which we want to transfer to remote storage.
So that sounds to me still some sort of restore, right?
So basically, why we are doing is the cloning process is we don't want to share the restrict secret in application namespace, right? We want to keep the data movement in Velero namespace where Velero is right.
Yeah, I'll think about it. Yeah.
So by the way, so the cloned snapshot is coming from the, underlying data storage, right?
No, it's the same storage. It's the same piece of data, I think.
Yeah, it's the same data. It's
Okay.
using the same snap handle.
Okay, so that is very fast when you clone the snapshot, right?
Yep.
No.
Okay.
Not actually. Johnny, actually, if the snapshot is very large, it will take time because it in the storage.
So
behind the
by cloning, we are not actually copying it. We are just using the same reference. I think this is an incorrect word to use here, clone, but we are not actually creating a new snap handle. So snap handle is the actual data on cluster, right?
Yes, actually, this actually called the CSI, create volume from snapshot, and we have discussed this with Yangxing, which is I think the maintainer of the CSI, right? CSI driver. Under the hood, the storage is indeed copy every piece of data, every byte into a new line, and expose that line as a cloned PVC.
Yes.
You are right. If that happens only if we have a different snap handle, the new learn will be created for every snap handle, right? That's right.
New long create for, sorry, I didn't get the question. But actually, if we call, once we call create volume from the snapshot, one new line will be created and the data is copied, actually cloned. But anyway, that is the only available method to create to expose the snapshot data to Kubernetes.
Okay.
So we don't have a it seems like we don't have any other choices.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
So as you mentioned, the WallSync tool is using RASIC and background.
Yeah.
So why don't we just use RASIC directly? And why do we use WallSync here?
Yeah, we should be able to use Velero's Restic as well, but Volsync gives, like, this is just for the demo purpose that we are using Restic, but Volsync is an operator, provides multiple data movers. Like it provides rsync as a data mover as well and Restic as a data mover as well. So
okay,
this wasn't implemented in upstream context, right? Because we still have the data mover design in progress.
okay.
Yeah, and plus we have Copia integration going. So we also want to discuss on similar lines that how we can use Copia as a data mover with CSI plugin, right? That would be something which can go ahead alongside Restic.
Okay, I got that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions about backup workflow? Okay. Moving on, we have the restore workflow. So for restore workflow, whenever you trigger a restore, the Velero CSI restore data mover plugin will create a volume snapshot restore CR. So this VSR CR is created whenever the VSB that we backed up was encountered during the restore process. So the data mover controller, the volume snapshot mover controller, reconciles on this VSR CR, and then we have WallSync, which this will trigger the VSR CR will trigger WallSync, and that will copy the volume snapshots content from remote storage to the cluster. And now we have a snapshot, right? This snapshot will have a new snap handle that we can use to create a VSC. So that snap handle can be supplied to Velero's CSI plugin to create a snapshot as a data source in application namespace. Basically, we are just hijacking the current CSI plugin workflow and providing a new snap handle from the data movement which occurred, not the one snap handle which Velero has in backup. So this is the restore workflow. Any confusion regarding this?
So we still use CSI procedure to create the target. I mean, during the to create the PVC, right?
Yep.
So yeah, do we have any other ways, like we create the PV and the PVC directly, like what we have done for pod volume backup restore?
So we did not change anything in Velero controller per se. We wanted to actually keep our changes limited to Velero CSI plugin so that we complete the CSI plugin, right? Making the snapshots durable. So that's why we haven't done any Velero controller changes. But can you say it again, what you mentioned?
I mean, for pod volume backup and restore,
Yeah.
actually we created pod and elect the pod to elect Kubernetes to provision the PV automatically, right? And so I'm just wondering whether there's any you know different, I mean, pros and cons to do in that way, or and the current way.
I think the process is less intrusive, right? As mentioned.
Yeah,
You just keep the change in the CSI
yes,
plugin, and the workflow in Velero stay unchanged.
Okay,
So
so
we can
there's
revisit
no,
that. Yeah, I think we can discuss offline. I'm a little lost when he's talking about this flow. Yonghui, I think we can discuss.
Okay,
offline.
okay. Then we can discuss offline.
okay. So we have a short demo about this. So initially we'll just look at the setup that we have in place. So this is just a data protection resource, like basically Velero install resource. And the configuration here, we have a BSL configured. And from plugins perspective, we have AWS plugin and CSI plugin configured. So whatever changes we are doing under features spec regarding data mover, we can do those changes to Velero install command as well. So we are just accepting credentials and we are just enabling data mover, and we have kept the timeout configurable. So this is just a setup.
Sorry, one more question here. So it means at the current code, we there is no option that we do the upload or data movement or do not, right? Sorry, I mean, does the user have the option to choose whether we do the data movement or not for that CSI after CSI sample is created? Or yeah.
I think we can give the option during install command itself, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's too detailed. That's beyond the scope of this demo.
Okay. Okay.
So we just have normal setup with restic pods and Velero and the volume snapshot mover controller, which reconciles on the new CRs that we introduced. And in bottom pane, we'll just stream the logs for our volume snapshot mover. And you can see this is looking for the events pertaining to VSR and VSB. Now let's look at the CRDs installed. So as mentioned, we have two new CRDs, volume snapshot backups and volume snapshot restores. And this is the controller which reconciles on these CRDs. And those are the logs for that controller. Now let's clear up, and we just have a MS SQL persistent application. So this is a stateful application, and this has UI. We'll just add some data to this application for our demo purposes, so that we can see the data gets retained during restore. You can see this is the UI via the route. We'll just add an entry. The entry name will be like AA demo entry, so that it appears on the top. We'll just do some random entries and enter the record in the database. You can see a demo entry is being entered and saved to the database. Now let's just perform a backup of this application. Take a look at the backup YAML. It's simple YAML which includes namespaces. That is the MS SQL persistent namespace and specifies BSL. And now let's just create the backup using the backup YAML file. The backup is created. Now let's look at the Velero logs, and we'll be able to observe some CSI logs, CSI plugin logs. So we're not using Velero's REST here. We'll be using the CSI workflow. You can see it has triggered the backup, and you can see the volume snapshot backup item action, CSI plugin logs being triggered, and it's executing the custom actions which we want. So it's waiting for the snapshot handle, volume snapshot content to have handle and be ready. Once the volume snapshot content is ready, we'll create a volume snapshot backup CR. See, we are creating a volume snapshot backup CR. Now this will trigger the bottom controller to reconcile on it and trigger the data movement. You can see it triggered the bottom controller, and it's cloning the volume snapshot content in Velero namespace. And at the same time, so this is where we need async plugins, right? Here we are waiting for, right now we are waiting for the volume snapshot backup to have status data. So the Velero backup operation is stalled here a bit, and until the data mover updates the VSB with status. So let's take a look at the volume snapshot content. Here you can see this is the clone volume snapshot content created. Now once the VSC is created and it's in ready state, we'll create a volume snapshot in Velero namespace referring to this VSC clone. This is the application namespace volume snapshot, and this is the clone volume snapshot. So VSC is ready, VSC is ready. And the next step is to create a PVC clone. Now let's check up on the PVC. You can see it's bound and it's created. And this is the PVC which acts as a data source to move the data from cluster, volume snapshot data from cluster to S3 via waltzing. Let's check upon VSB, that is the backup CRD we introduced. This has all the status conditions and all the information related to the PVC which we are trying to move. So if you look at it, you can see the spec, the protected namespace, secret reference, and VSC reference. And looking at the status, you can see it has the restrict repository URL, that is the BSL URL, then source PVC data, storage class, name, size, and volume snapshot class used. It conforms to all the CSI volume snapshot classes. So let's check up on the status once again. I think the snapshot is copied. As you can see, it's complete. So the phase is volume snapshot backup done. Now, once it's done, what the volume snapshot mover controller does is it cleans up the cloned resources before marking the backup as complete. You can see the backup is complete, which means the cleanup is done. And backup is completed.
So that means during the upload, during the process of uploading this snapshot, the backup of the backup CR of Velero will be in progress, right?
Exactly.
There is no, okay.
Yeah, that's why we need async plugins, so that the backup progress can.
Yeah, and this is an area where with the async plugins, and not only is Velero's backup in progress, but it's waiting to go to the next item too.
Yeah,
while this is happening. So
right,
this would be one of these async actions that would happen in the background, and then at the end of the backup, Velero would check, based on that design to see whether they're done, and then the backup is still not be completed until it's done. But we wouldn't be holding up the other backup actions.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to I just want to show the backup details once. So you can see here, we are backing up the volume snapshot backup CR, which will be useful for our restore. It has all the data. And that's the CR. And one thing to note is we'll see the volume snapshot data is in S3. In order to confirm that, we can copy the snap handle ID, the snap content ID, and we'll search for it in our S3 bucket just to make sure we have actually moved the data from cluster to Amazon S3 in this case. So this is our bucket which we used for our demo. Under OpenShift ADP, that's the namespace. If you search, you can see we are able to find the snap content ID. This is the snapshot we backed up using data mover, and you can see the timestamp. It matches the system timestamp. So it happened just now, like 2 minutes before. So that is the backup. So let's clean up the application namespace and remove all the volume snapshot content and volume snapshots from the cluster, so as to recreate a disaster scenario. So let's delete this namespace and also remove the volume snapshot content. So we don't have any reference in the cluster, and Velero, the data mover, will have to move the data from S3 to cluster and use that snap handle during restore. Everything is done. You can see the UI is also down, the app is down. So let's go ahead and take a look at the restore CR. Sorry, the restore YAML that we want to use. Before that, we'll just do a log streaming setup in the bottom pane so that we can take a look at the events that happen, similar to the backup workflow. So the setup is done, and this is a simple restore YAML that we'll be using, which refers to the backup name and excludes non-essential resources for application to be restored. So let's create the restore CR instance and stream the Velero logs. So created restore, and let's take a look at the logs. So these are the restore log. Restore is triggered, and waiting for the CSI plugin. Yeah, you can see it's executing on the VSB that it encountered and created a VSR, which triggered the data mover controller in the bottom pane to trigger the volume snapshot to be moved from S3 to our cluster. And this is where, once again, we need the async plugins, because now the Velero restore is stalled due to the plugin action. Let's take a look at the VSR. You can see this is the same data which we had in our VSB during backup, and the data movement is triggered. You can see in bottom pane, it's waiting for the replication destination to complete. That's the CR used by Volsync to move the data from S3 to the cluster. You can see the status of VSR phase volume snapshot restore done. So snapshot is moved from S3 to cluster, and the Velero restore is also complete. Now let's see whether we have our data, whether the data persisted. You can see we had a demo as the data entry for a demo, and the data is successfully restored using data mover. So I think this concludes this short demo. Next up, future scope and Velero integration. We just hope to implement a similar data mover implementation, like not the same, but on similar lines, like modifying the CSI plugin and moving those data movement parts to Velero controller and production of similar CRDs. And another thing to point out is the async plugin framework. We needed to improve the data mover performance because we don't want to stall the core backup restore operation for the CSI plugin to report back and then continue. So that is one thing which we hope to achieve. For references, I've added I can share this slides post demo. So this is just our operator and then volume snapshot mover CR, volume snapshot mover controller that reconciles the CRs. Then the modified CSI plugin, we have a data mover branch, which has all the modifications, and also a vol sync controller, which moves the data. Okay, time for some Q&A. Thank you guys. Let me know if there are any questions about this demo.
So what's the impact if you don't do the VSC clone? I mean, if you do not clone the snapshot content and do the upload directly based on that, will there be any problem?
So then you will have to create the secrets and access the application namespace, right?
But even then, you're still creating a new PVC
Volumes.
and a new pod, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So you're not cloning data here. You're just making it a copy of the YAML resource in
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand that clone is another VSC resource pointing to the same handle, but I don't quite understand if that's really necessary. But you may still reuse that. Will it be a problem if you use that VSC and you create a volume snapshot with that PS? That will be a problem.
Yeah, I think a volume snapshot content cannot have more than one VS
right. Yeah.
referring.
Yeah.
That's why I think under CSI conforms, there is only one resource which can have one-to-many mapping, that is snap handle. That's why we created VSC, then VS, and then PVC.
All right. Thanks.
I can share that one-to-many mapping issue if you like, where they have mentioned about this.
Yeah, I think we saw that also when we are trying to modify the CSI plugin. Yeah, now I remember. Thanks. And after that, please share this slide and the video. You can update this hackmd file to add the links.
Yeah, sure thing.
Just in case anyone wanna. And yeah, I think next step is how we reflect that into the design in the Velero and make sure the CRs and all the plugin stuff is makes sense. And yeah,
totally.
Thanks for the demo. Yeah,
no worries. Thank you guys.
Okay, thanks Shubham for the demo. It's a great one.
Thank you.
And I think we will have more discussions offline
yes.
Yes. And for now, do we have any other things to discuss for this community meeting? If no, I think we can stop here for this today's meeting. And thanks everyone, and have a good day and night.
So, quick question: did we decide that we're not having the meeting at all next week then, since it's not on the calendar, and we delayed the feature phase anyway?
Right. We are not having the meeting next week.
Okay, got it. That's what I thought. So just confirm.
Okay. Thank you guys. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.